Tonight, victims of one of President Assad's worst atrocities demand his return to Syria to stand trial. At least 1,400 people were killed when government forces dropped sarin gas on eastern Ghouta. Now their families want justice. Also coming up, the underground prison where protesters were kept alive just to be tortured. Time to shift to a wartime mindset. The head of NATO's warning about the Russian threat. Plus, intervention or isolation, Donald Trump says he'll end what he calls bad wars. We'll assess his likely impact in this region. That's all coming up on The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Good evening from Damascus. Well, this week, the true scale of President Assad's brutal suppression of his people became clear. And now Syrians are demanding justice. We'll bring you a report from the site of one of the worst atrocities in a moment. But let's begin with the network of prisons where those opposed to the regime were interrogated, tortured, and sometimes executed. In the city of Homs, our chief correspondent has seen an underground complex with coffin-like cells hidden beneath a housing estate. Here's his report.
Torture and repression were the tools the Syrian regime used to keep power. It happened below ground, where the horrors couldn't be seen or they hoped heard.
These are offices. These are the gates through to the cells.
A rebel soldier led us down. The cells are tiny. People could stay here for years. They were fed, but for only one reason.
They are not giving them food as if they care for them, but they have information and they are trying to take the information from them.
Okay, so they keep them alive so that they can be interrogated.
كانوا يخلون على قيد الحياة بس لا يقدروا يحيوا معهم.
بس مشان هيك بس اللي خلصوا التحقيق معهم بيتم نقلهم لأماكن ثانية أو
Once they finish the investigation, they move them somewhere else.
أو بيتم تصفيتهم بهذا المكان.
Or they kill them over here.
So as soon as they got whatever they needed to know, and maybe they got nothing, they would then be murdered.
Yes.
In Homs, random detention was continuous. Nobody was safe.
There's Fatima, a woman name.
It's a female name. So women and children would be held in cells like this,
yes.
And their crime being what?
شو ما تكون الجرم؟
ممكن متظاهرين عاديين، ممكن مارقين بالطريق بالصدفة في مظاهرة.
Maybe they were passing randomly in the street and there was a protest.
And just pulled.
Without our lights, we couldn't see. That too was part of the torture.
النظام بيستخدم هذا الأسلوب بحيث ما يعرف المعتقل إذا نهار ولا ليل.
The regime used this method so the people don't know if it's day or night.
Right. So it was always dark.
Yeah, always dark.
Right.
It's clear the mistreatment of prisoners was calculated.
What we now know is that there are detention centres like this and cells like this all over Homs, but also all over the country. What we know here is that bodies of people who died in their cells were left outside for days to make life unpleasant for those inside, to act as a warning and basically to intimidate. The whole of this process was to protect Assad's family by instilling fear in all of these communities.
Abu Faras deserted the army because of the torture he witnessed, and he too was arrested.
And were you tortured?
أنت تعذبت؟
كثير.
So much.
بالكهرباء بالأدوات التعذيب.
Electricity, tools.
طبعا ما بدون ما أشوف في غماضة على عيني.
You always I fold like they blindfold you.
من الطرق اللي عذبوني فيها أنا وأخي.
The ways they used to torture us, me and my brother.
يحطوني أنا يعذبوني قدامه وهو بالعكس.
They used to torture my brother in front of me and me in front of my brother.
Wow.
مشان يكون حتى ضغط نفسي علينا.
So it will be like mental, psychological pressure on us.
The cells are beneath this internal security complex in the heart of a housing estate, another message to the population. The officers left in a hurry. A stockpile of weapons and ammunition, much supplied by Russia, was abandoned. Abandoned too, files, thousands upon thousands of them, detailing the lives of civilians and their assumed political beliefs. Everyone in Syria was spied upon. We're told these people were on a watch list. But files on the prisoners were burned in this room as the regime collapsed. Who the prisoners were, what happened to them, may never be known. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, Homs.
Well, today, an American man who says he crossed into Syria 7 months ago has been found safe in a town just outside of Damascus. Travis Timmerman told our US partner NBC News that he had been detained by a border guard in late May after illegally crossing the mountains into Syria as part of a religious pilgrimage. Have a listen.
I was in prison for 7 months. After that, I entered into the Syrian border illegally. I crossed the mountain between Lebanon and Syria, and I was living in that mountain for 3 days and 3 nights underwater. And I was seen by a border guard whilst I did that. And then that's when I was arrested and I was sent to a Syrian prison called Filat Philistine.
And you're an American. Where are you from in America?
Missouri.
You're from Missouri.
Yeah.
Who are you working for? Which agency?
بس عبد بس عبد
بس بدنا مقابله لنضل سريعه.
I'm not a reporter.
You're not a reporter. What were you doing crossing into Syria?
I was on a pilgrimage
Pilgrimage to where?
to Damascus.
That was Travis Timmerman, found today in Syria, and it was our colleagues at NBC interviewing him. Well, the plan to close Syria's notoriously harsh prisons and hunt down those involved in killing and torturing detainees, that continues. Well, rights groups estimate that more than 30,000 detainees died at Saydnaya prison, known locally as a human slaughterhouse. The artist and audio investigator Lawrence Abu Hamdan tried to recreate what life was like for inmates and produced this installation with testimony from detainees. Just have a listen.
صيدنايا يعني الهدوء هو سيد الموقف. في كثير هدوء، ما فيك تعلي صوتك، ما فيك تحكي بصوت عالي، دائما لازم تكون نبرة صوتك واطية. فهذا الشيء بخليك تسمعي كل شيء.
صرنا العكس تماما. اذا بتصرخ بيزيد القتل، اذا بتسكت بيخف القتل لا حتى يوقف.
الأصوات اللي كتير مهمة، صوت عم يجي لعندك من وراء الحيط، صوت ضرب. أول ما تسمع صوت ضرب أنت بتضل حاطط بإذنك إنه هذا الضرب حيتكرر لأكثر من مكان ولا خلص بس بهذا المهجع. إذا ضربوا هذا المهجع ورجعوا ضربوا وإجا الصوت رد نفسه من مهجع تاني، فأنت عرف إنه أنت هلأ جايك دور الضرب.
Well, I spoke to Lawrence earlier and asked him how he was able to uncover what was taking place inside. Have a look.
I was leading the acoustic part of an investigation that looked into trying to solicit as much information as we could out of 6 survivors that escaped from Saydnaya. Of course, now you have many more survivors to interview, and the work can really continue. At that time, it was really just about getting as much information about the few memories that had been inside of there, that had been blindfolded, that had been kept in the dark, and that had been really exposed mostly to the prison through sound. And so it was really about understanding what they heard, and to understand what crimes were taking place inside.
Just tell me about silence, because silence was also used as a weapon of war in the prison.
Yes, silence was brutally enforced in Saydnaya, to the extent that even when one person was being beaten or tortured, they couldn't make any cries of pain. If they were to do so, the beating would intensify. Silence was the main rule that was told to them when they first entered. No speech was possible. Even the guards, as we understood, would wear sneakers to move around the prison silently, to catch people in the act of speaking, and then to deliver the punishment that they would receive for speech. One lasting impression one of the witnesses I interviewed in 2016 told me was that it was so quiet that apart from the loud sound of the beatings that would resonate throughout the prison, affecting everybody, you know, the prison was an echo chamber that was trying, you know, a beating on one person was felt in some ways by all through the omnidirectional bleed of sound. But he said in the quiet moments, the prison was so silent that the loudest sound he remembers hearing was the crushing of lice, the killing of lice, which he said was as loud as crushing a sesame seed between your thumb and forefinger. So just imagine how quiet and how terrified everybody was, and the amount of violence it would take to keep a place full of thousands of people that quiet.
That's what I wanted to get to, the horror of remaining silent despite the beatings, despite the torture, the electrocution that people were going through, and the fact that people were witnessing all of this, but they had to remain silent, as did the person that this harm was being inflicted on.
Yeah, but the counter effect of that was that many of the witnesses I interviewed had developed a very acute sensitivity to sound. The silence trained them to hear anything, any noise, and to bring out signification in those noises. For example, one of the witnesses I interviewed was able to identify each particular lock sound. And if you can imagine, every door has the same lock on it, but he could differentiate each idiosyncratic lock mechanism from the other, to identify the position of the guards, to know how close they were to him, to know that he had to be braced for attack. And ultimately, these details were what allowed him to survive.
Lawrence, now that you look at the prison and it's been opened up to the world, what are you learning more about it?
Well, the prison was inextricable from the violence that was conducted there. The silence, the sensory deprivation, the constant fear of death, and the hunger, the starvation. So even though now we see the prison, and we see it with the lights on, we see people talking as they move through, we hear the horrible cries of pain replaced by, you know, the incredulous shouts of people in rapturous liberation. You know, it's a very different thing that we're looking at now than the experience as it was being inside there. And so I think they're really two different things. And I think maybe the task now is to think about how we can preserve the memory of those and the experiences of those and what people went through, and use that as a monument, as a site for the memorial of the Assad regime's violence.
That was Lawrence Abu Hamdan, an audio investigator, talking to me there about the horrors of Saydnaya. Do stay with us. We've got lots more coming up after the break, live here from Damascus.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning. Very
nice to see you. How are you feeling?
Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Conor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death.
Scotland has a shameful record. Worse than England, the worst in Europe.
Why not just say you failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent. Free wherever you get your news.
It's over, isn't it?
The Americans say he is, Rossi, a fraudster.
This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country.
A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Ennis after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me. They intimidated me.
Sky News, the full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers. We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back. Let's turn now to eastern Ghouta, 10 kilometres east of the capital, with voices we haven't heard until now. More than 11 years after Bashar al Assad ordered his forces to drop nerve gas on his own people. Entire families were killed and buried together in makeshift graves. Many who rushed to help also died. Now, those who survived are demanding justice. They've been speaking to our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn.
Less than 10 miles from Bashar al Assad's presidential palace, we're heading for the site of one of the worst war crimes this century, where Syria's dictator dropped sarin nerve gas on his own people, hoping to stop rebels' advance on Damascus. Wafika lost 2 of her sons and 2 of her grandsons that night in August 2013. Dying the most painful of deaths.
They brought them to me, telling me they were dead. They said, come take them. Young men killed in a chemical attack. They were naked, and what was coming out of their mouth was unbelievable. It was like soap frothing out of their throats.
We went to the site of the clinic nearby, where most of the victims died. Kamel lost 2 of his brothers and his parents and was put into a coma after being engulfed in the poison.
I started seeing white around me, a thick, powdery cloud of smooth, almost silky white smoke in the sky.
Fadi arrived to find both parents, a brother and his cousins dead.
We were in shock. We started crying. All around were dead bodies on the ground. People were in cars. The engines were still on, but the people were dead.
We were taken down to the basement where the clinic had been, shown where the victims were treated and where the bodies piled up. Footage taken that night shows scenes of utter terror. At least 1,400 people are thought to have died, many after being exposed to the nerve agent when they rushed to help others. These pictures would shock the world and provoke fierce debate in London and Washington.
1, 2, 3.
The dead were taken here, placed in 5 trenches, shoulder to shoulder, 3 bodies deep. Qasim helped bury them.
It was like the apocalypse. We could not believe the way they were attacking us. We started putting entire families together. We tried to put the kids, the parents, and even the grandparents together.
Britain refused to punish Assad for what he did here with military action, and that allowed America to do the same. The rebels were stopped in their tracks on the outskirts of Damascus, and it would be at least another decade before Assad could be toppled. More than 10 years of repression, hundreds of thousands of Syrians being killed, but the repercussions went beyond Syria. The West's weakness encouraged other leaders to break the rules as well, not least Vladimir Putin. The West can make up for that failure now and bring Bashar al Assad to justice. He should be sent back to Syria, his victims told us, and punished.
He should suffer and then be sent to the body crusher. And in the same way that our people were crushed and rivers of blood came from them, the same should happen to him.
It'll take years for Syria to recover from the Assad regime, and crucial to that will be finding justice for his victims.
And Dom joins me here now, live in Damascus. Dom, just some powerful, horrifying stories that we're now being properly exposed to. What did you learn from being there?
I think I learned really that we have peered into this conflict, this revolution that became a civil war, and we've done the best that we can as reporters to report on it, using bits of video that's been smuggled out through a restricted internet, trying to sift through a kind of barrage of misinformation, Russian misinformation peddled by the Russians and also their apologists in the West. And people at home have tried to do their best, sort of getting a picture of what Bashar al Assad did, but it's not been good enough, really. And it's only when you go out to these places and talk to people, you work out, and it sinks in the enormity of what Assad did. I mean, what happened in Ghouta was very well documented at the time. The UN went there and investigated it. It was the centre of that big furore about Barack Obama's red lines over chemical weapons that the British eventually kind of gave him a way to wriggle out of. And you can say that that led to other leaders looking at the West and saying, when you say don't do it, or else, not to be taken very seriously. Of course, Vladimir Putin, of course, most of all. So it was very well covered, but it's only when you go there and you talk to people, when you stand next to a grave and a man tells you that he watched and counted as entire families were buried in graves 2 meters deep, 3 bodies high, shoulder to shoulder for, as long as this roof. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rows, 1,400 people, gassed by their own people, using a gas that he dropped near a medical centre, knowing that when people went to casualties, they would be covered in sarin gas. It's a nerve agent, it stops your nervous system working, and it stops you breathing. Then many more people would die. And it sort of sinks in, that's what he was doing, and it makes you realise that, we have to do a better job going out and covering these stories, but also the people gathering testimony from the day when eventually, hopefully, Bashar al Assad and the people behind him, his regime, are brought to justice. The evidence is there to prosecute him. I mean, he is in Moscow. He's unlikely to end up in The Hague anytime soon. But who would have predicted his demise so quickly? Who knows what will happen to Vladimir Putin himself one day? And in the meantime, we have to gather this testimony, preparing for a possible prosecution. So people like that, who really want him to be brought back to face the justice and the suffering that he imposed on so many people, people like that have justice seen done after what happened to them.
Dom, thank you so much, and we'll be speaking to you a little later in the programme as well. Well, I'm joined now by Jerry Smith, a former chemical weapons inspector in Syria for the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons. Thank you very much, Jerry, for joining us here on the programme. We're just speaking there to our correspondent who has been to eastern Ghouta, who has heard firsthand about the horrors that the world saw so many years ago when we saw Bashar al Assad use sarin gas on his own people. You know the circumstances better than most, all too well. Just looking at the situation now, what is your assessment of where the country is now, given what it went through?
Well, great to speak to you, Yalda. Look, Syria has been through hell, and it is with surprise, but also relief that the Assad regime has fallen for me. And having firsthand, myself and my colleagues, seeing the horror up front, speaking to people that suffered, taking samples from the locations and demonstrating that that agent was used. It's great to see that regime has fallen, and as kind of Dom indicated, the next steps is to see if we can get him and his other cohorts to justice.
Yeah, Jerry, I mean, I guess the other worry for the international community, and certainly the United States, the UK and Israel, others have expressed, is that chemical weapons, their arsenal, the arsenal they had, still exists in this country. Can you just give us a sense of what they have and what is still here?
Yeah, well, Syria declared a certain quantity, which I was part of the observing of neutralising and removing from that country. But we always suspected that there was more. And we've seen subsequent OPCW investigations state clearly that there is still a whole range of questions that remain unanswered. So I think the concern is that there is a remaining capability, whether that's the agent itself or the ability, the equipment to manufacture it, plus, of course, the people that were involved. So there is still a capability there that we don't know what's happened to it. Now, we've seen some reports of US and Israeli attacks on various facilities, and some of those may well be connected to trying to reduce the, if there is chemical agent stored there, to try and destroy it. That's not as easy as you might think. That concern remains. And of course, the country is still balkanized. It's not a unitary government. Obviously, the main interlocutors now have a past of perhaps being part of terrorist organizations or born from terrorist organizations. So the concern would be that the agent could still be loose, and that terrorist organizations get hold of it and potentially smuggle it out.
Yeah, I just want to quote the Director General of the OPCW, who has said that they're following those airstrikes conducted by Israel very closely. And he also goes on to say, we do not know yet whether these strikes have affected chemical weapons-related sites. Such airstrikes could create a risk of contamination. Is this something that worries you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, there's... without going into huge detail, that modern air forces, certainly in the West, and I would imagine the Israelis as well, specific weapons have been designed to sort of actually attack and destroy a stockpile of agents. It is a challenge, and so that would be the risk. But I'm sure that the military would be taking that into account to make sure that there was minimal collateral damage, and of course, attacking and destroying a facility that people then subsequently entered and there was contamination, of course, wouldn't be great. But I think the greater risk would be that if if there is a stockpile there, to leave it unattacked, unaffected, and if it fell into the wrong hands, then then the greater risks could follow downstream.
Jerry, we're really grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us.
No problem.
This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim, live in Damascus. Next up on the programme, he's Times Person of the Year, and he says he'll solve the world's conflicts. We'll examine how Donald Trump will tackle war here in the Middle East and across the globe.
that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back to the programme. From conflict here in the Middle East to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Donald Trump says many of the world's wars would not have happened if he were president. Speaking to Time magazine, which has named him their Person of the Year, the incoming US president was critical of the approach taken by the West, saying some of its actions had made things worse. His words perhaps heard in Europe, where the head of NATO today warned the alliance is not prepared for the threats it faces. Our US correspondent Mark Stone reports.
It is the latest moment in this remarkable comeback. USA! A double dose of glee for Donald Trump, surely, opening the New York Stock Exchange on the day he's named Time magazine's Person of the Year. And on the traders' floor, where markets have hit record highs since his election, superstar status.
It's 9:48, shouldn't you be making money?
But more than that, institutional status. He is back, and he's backed here too. Self-satisfaction for sure, given how many times he was written off. It is remarkable that just a few months ago, a few blocks from here, is the courtroom where he was made a convict. Now forgotten here. Instead, we're beginning to see the contours of his second term. No clear picture, but hints of what it will be like from day one.
Who else have you had the opportunity to invite to your inauguration?
Well, I've invited they've all accepted. Everybody I've invited.
President Xi as well?
Very good relationship.
It is the second time he's been the Person of the Year, and with the shot, an interview with hints of what his foreign policy will look like. On the Middle East and a two-state solution, he said, "I support whatever solution we can do to get peace. There are other ideas other than two-state, but I support whatever is necessary to get not just peace, a lasting peace." On the chances of war with Iran, anything can happen, he said. And on Ukraine, a commitment not to abandon. But he said, "I disagree very vehemently with sending missiles hundreds of miles into Russia. Why are we doing that? We're just escalating this war and making it worse." Across the Atlantic, the NATO chief called for a wartime mindset.
We are not ready for what is coming our way in 4 to 5 years. Danger is moving towards us at full speed. We must not look the other way.
Mark Rutte's comments are a reflection of two linked concerns. First, that offering Putin a deal on Ukraine with some Ukrainian land would only embolden him in the future. And second, that Europe can no longer rely on American military leadership. Person of the Year, then, for 2024, but it is in the coming years that the impact of his leadership will be felt. Change ahead, for sure. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
And, of course, Mark joins us now live from Washington. Mark, we're starting to get a bit of a glimpse of Donald Trump's foreign policy.
We are, yeah. I mean, it is only a little clearer, but as I said in my report, we don't have a picture, but we certainly have the contours of what it might look like. But ambiguity is kind of what he thrives on, and I think still there is a lot of ambiguity, whether it be on quite how he would force a ceasefire in Gaza. Of course, he said he wants the hostages out before he takes office. By the time he takes office, how will he do that? And to what extent are both sides in that conflict willing to meet his demands? We just don't know the detail on that. On Ukraine, again, very, very interesting that he seems openly now, for the first time, I think, to be criticising the current American administration of President Biden for sending those long-range missiles, or allowing the long-range American missiles to be used inside, deep inside Russia. That, he says, is the wrong decision. But in the interview with Time, he doesn't go into why he thinks that. But he does say that he will remain committed to Ukraine. So that clearly positive from President Zelensky's point of view. But I think it's also the case that as these contours become clearer, European leaders, who, remember, do not have the strength of leadership that perhaps they had under his first administration. Angela Merkel, a very strong European leader, she's gone now. Emmanuel Macron, he's much weaker than he was back during the last term. But European leaders know that they need to take care of themselves, because the ambiguity of a second Trump presidency is dangerous, is concerning for Europe, as of course it is, and it is designed to be for people like Vladimir Putin. The last point I'd make, I went to an event yesterday, Yalda, that was all about Iran on Capitol Hill. Republican lawmakers talking about now being the opportunity to affect regime change one way or another in Iran. It was a fascinating discussion. But when you drill down and ask these lawmakers, what do you think Donald Trump will do on Iran? They simply don't know. So there's still a lot of unknowns about what, in an international realm, what Trump 2.0 will actually look like.
Yeah, absolutely. And whether it will be very different from his first administration, where he was in the middle of maximum pressure on Iran, for example. And if he tries that again this time, given that the Iranian empire has now been weakened. I mean, we look at the situation here in Syria, for example, Hezbollah decapitated. I mean, Gaza in ruins. These are all different groups and militias that Iran propped up, and governments that they supported now weakened. And Donald Trump, famously said that he could end the Ukraine war in 24 hours. So I guess European leaders are also thinking they need to step up, and certainly when it comes to defence spending.
Yeah, a war footing is how Mark Rutte put it. He's, of course, former leader in Europe, the former Dutch Prime Minister, now running NATO. And he effectively is saying that they need to take care of themselves. But on your Iran point, I think it's really interesting. I don't think, like just a few weeks ago, no one expected Assad to have fallen. No one expected the chips to have fallen in quite the way that they have, and so quickly. And so I think for the incoming Trump administration, they are now being told that they have an opportunity here to affect a reshaping of the Middle East, because there is a vacuum in Syria. Syria needs to be somehow molded to America's interests, they would believe here in Washington. And if they don't mold it, then maybe Russia can step back in, or perhaps can even retain its military bases there. So this America First president, who wanted to be focused here in America and not be distracted by faraway wars, is, I think, going to be pulled into not a war in the Middle East necessarily, but certainly he's going to be pressured to affect American influence in a region that he would probably like just to forget about.
Mark, thank you so much for your analysis there. So what could a Donald Trump administration mean for the future of a place like here, Syria? Well, writing on social media as rebels surrounded Damascus, he gave us a bit of a hint. Let's just take a look. He said, Syria is a mess, but it is not our friend, and the United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved. Well, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has repeatedly returned to the region. Today, he was back again, and he said he was talking to Israel and Turkey about their actions inside Syria and the threat from the so-called Islamic State.
We want to avoid sparking any kinds of additional conflicts inside of Syria at a time when we want to see this transition to an interim government and to a better way forward for Syria. And part of that also has to be ensuring that ISIS doesn't rear its ugly head again. And critical to making sure that doesn't happen is the so-called SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, that we've been supporting. They've been critical in making sure that ISIS is kept at bay.
That was Antony Blinken there. Well, let's speak now to Qutaiba Idilbi, who is a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Rafiq Hariri Center, specializing in Syria. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program. There's a number of things here, but let's just first talk about the incoming administration. Donald Trump put out that tweet when the rebels had surrounded Damascus, and he made it very clear that this conflict, this issue, this region is not America's problem. How do you think that is going to play out, given how much this region is now shifting and changing?
Certainly. First, I wish I was in your place in Damascus. I've been out in exile for over a decade, and what a lovely scene it seems from where you are. On President Trump's tweet, I think we definitely need to put that in context of what was happening in Washington then. Before December 8th, the Biden administration was working on starting a normalization process with the Assad regime, where sanctions would be lifted in return for Assad limiting Iranian presence and stopping or cutting the land bridge to Hezbollah. So President Trump's message was very much designed, actually, or directed at the Biden administration, at the National Security Council, that was actively pursuing those plans to prop up the plan. I think for what would come next, we're really looking at investing in this opportunity where for the first time in almost 45 years, Iran is out of Syria. And for the first time, there could be an establishment of a buffer zone, basically, in Syria, where Iran is prevented from using Syria as a base to launch its malign activities across the region. Personalities within the Trump administration.
I just want to ask you on that, because do you think that the personalities within the administration, Donald Trump himself, will be able to see this moment as an opportunity?
Definitely so. I think some of the front line officials who could take positions within the Trump administration are officials who've actually worked on Syria during the first Trump administration. There are conversations about how the United States can work directly with Turkey to ensure that the future governing of Syria is inclusive for everyone, but also conversations that include the delisting Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or removing sanctions in return for assurances that Hayat Tahrir al-Sham does not constitute a national security threat for the United States and for its partners in the region.
Yeah, we're certainly seeing the regional powers now already reaching out to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, as you say, and opening that sort of dialogue, that path to dialogue, because they realize if they want to deal with Syria, they now need to deal with these rebel groups.
Absolutely, yes. Of course, as you know, there would be a ministerial meeting coming up in Amman with the partners, including the United States, to discuss what to do next. But I think the initial outreach by the diplomatic community, especially from the region in Damascus, has been a positive sign towards the new government in Damascus. I would expect that there would be more international partners coming to Damascus. We saw today that the Qatari chief spy and the Turkish chief spy are in Damascus for meetings with the rebels. But I should expect also that some European countries, Asian countries would also be soon in Damascus to discuss how to utilize this moment to move positively towards the future in the region, and to also make sure that there is a political transition in Syria that could cement Syrians' goals in freedom and representative governance, but also cement, as I mentioned, this win where Iran is finally out of Syria.
I just want to ask about the Kurds, because we saw Donald Trump attempt to abandon the Kurds. Of course, the Kurds fought alongside the United States very closely when they were fighting against the so-called Islamic State. So I'm just curious to know, do you think that he will attempt again to pull U.S. forces out of the country?
So that's certainly a challenge for the upcoming administration. U.S. CENTCOM has been arguing that the U.S. presence in Syria is definitely important to counter ISIS, but it was also as important to counter or to limit Iranian militias' accessibility into Syria. Now that Iran is out, I fear that there is less of an argument for the US military to stay. I think what needs to happen in the future, and this would really depend on US diplomatic investment with Turkey and other partners, I think the focus needs to be on making sure there is a deal reached between the rebels and the SDF that would secure the Kurds' win throughout the last 10 years and prevent any further encouragement into northeast Syria.
Yeah, I mean, just on that point, because of course this has been a point of contention between Turkey and Washington. And so, as you say, if this is a moment of opportunity and Turkey is playing quite a significant role, there are already Kurdish groups saying they're extremely concerned about what could happen next to their communities.
Absolutely, and I think this fear is legitimate. Here in Washington, as we look at the developments on the ground, I think there has been a more worry about what Turkish-supported groups like the Syrian National Army would do, more than what the rebels or HTS would actually do. And that's why it's important to exert more pressure and have more conversations with Turkey about the role that the Turkish-supported opposition could play in northern Syria. At the same time, we have not to forget that the governance model that the SDC has established in Arab majority areas in northeast Syria has also been a source of instability in that region. So while a deal is important between the rebels and the SDF about the future of the country, about how the Kurds could play an active role in the transitional governing body and in the future of Syria, I think internally, the SDF should actually look internally and work with the Arab communities to make sure that the grievances that those communities have been suffering from in the last few years are resolved, so that could be utilized to make better concessions or better deal with the rebels and the rest of the country.
Qutayba, we're really grateful for your time. Thank you so much for joining us here on the program.
Thank you.
This is The World with me. Thank you. This is The World with me, Yalda Hakim. Next up on the program, we'll look back at an historic week and ask what next for Syria.
I'm James Matthews, and I'm Sky's US correspondent, based here in Washington, D.C.
Do you fear a fourth indictment?
Is it a draw?
Does your government owe an apology to the British home children?
Great to see you.
Does your government owe them an apology?
The fact that they were intercepted, does that indicate a military weakness on the part of Iran?
No, no, no.
Free, wherever you get your news. There's no doubting the strength of this hurricane as it roars through. You can feel a devastating power. It had been a difficult night in a deadly storm.
Bang, bang. You can hear it hitting the windows.
Our houses are okay.
It's depressing. As bad as all of this is, it could have been much worse. Today, this land they call sacred is at the heart of America's electric car revolution.
To me, it's a sacred ground.
The white gold rush is a race that Biden doesn't want to lose. I've covered some of the biggest stories in the world. Donald Trump, 45th President of the United States, it would appear is about to learn his fate.
Escort coming out!
San Quentin houses America's largest death row. They rarely allow cameras onto the condemned block.
James Matthews, Sky News.
I want to be treated equally like everyone else. It's one step closer to getting out, to getting off death row.
Sky News. Get the full story first. Mr. Trump, James Matthews from Sky News.
Hey, James.
You're diminished by claims that you're a racist.
Question?
Mr. Musk, has your ignorance and ego cost Ukrainian lives? Vladimir Putin calls you outstanding. What do you call him, sir?
He's from Sky News. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions.
Today in Manchester, there is nothing quite like it. Blue and red lock horns. most compelling soap opera.
The Manchester Derby on USA.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Well, it's been a tumultuous week here in Syria. Rebel forces swept the country, taking towns and villages across this country. And of course, President Assad's troops downing arms before he fled to Moscow, bringing to an end decades of brutality. A transitional government is now in place. Let's just hear the hopes of the Syrian people for the future of their country.
Finally, all our dreams are going to come true. Our simplest needs we weren't able to have, like electricity and water, now will be available for all.
We feel like we've been born again. I went to the square and it felt like I was seeing it for the first time.
The country is moving towards development and reconstruction. It's going towards stability.
We want the new generation to live in dignity and in freedom, not like us.
And Dominic is back with us to give us some more analysis. I mean, Dom, it's been quite an extraordinary few weeks here. I mean, in just a week and a half, the rebels swept across this country, and then suddenly Bashar al Assad was gone. And this country can, for now, breathe a sigh of relief, but there is still so much uncertainty in this country.
So much uncertainty, and it's been moving at such a warp speed. I think there is a sense now that the country is trying to sort of catch its breath. And is trying to work out what happens next. We've had the revolution, we've had a lot of revelations this week, and I think what they've revealed most of all is kind of why the regime did crumble and implode as it did, as we've sort of gone out across the country. It's got so much more poor than it was even 10 years ago, when 13 years ago, when this popular uprising began that was so brutally crushed by Assad. So it's kind of made more sense why the regime just folded in on itself, and eventually he got toppled so quickly after what has been such a long struggle by his people. But we're now waiting really for the big reveal from Jalani, the HTS leader, and those behind him. And the big question is he going to lead inclusively? Is he going to bring in so many different denominations within Syria and give them what they want? And what we're struck most by, I think, after the euphoria, is the hope of Syrians. They have enormous hope for their future. Finally, they've got rid of this regime and there's a chance, but they want to now see what their new leadership is going to do in the place of Assad.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, so many hopes, so many promises. We'll have to see how it all pans out. Dom, thank you so much. Well, as Dom was saying there, the Syrian people here feel finally like they can actually breathe. I was out in the marketplace just yesterday, and so many young women were coming up to me wanting to share their stories, wanting to tell me about what they had experienced over the course of the last few decades and how free they feel now, the fact that they can taste freedom. We'll be monitoring the situation here in Syria over the coming weeks and months. Thank you so much for joining us here on the programme. For now, from me and the team, good night.